of what our teachers have been doing because we've been following New York State modules. And this just kind of goes through the intent on having a program that is developmentally organized K through 12. So as you can see in this image, we have our students working with manipulatives and transferring that into, in this case, an expanded notation and working in pairs. And I think the key to this program is really for the students to practice those math conversations with one another, using those pictorial models and sharing their mathematical thinking with one another. And part of it, as we will talk about as we continue, is where we see math throughout our life, not just in our classroom. So some of the materials our teachers and your children have access to are those manipulatives. As you can see from the screen, they're called didacts, but you'll see manipulatives. You may have heard of like unifix cubes or the clock where they're going to work on telling time. They have the dry erase boards that they will write on and use manipulatives. We also have this wonderful digital platform, which our teachers have received some training and will continue to support them with additional training on the resources that they have available. And there's also a great family component for them to for you to continue having the support and support their mathematical thinking at home. So here you'll see it's a little bit small, but you can see how each grade level is broken up. And so for K through 5, this also for us includes pre-K, just for that notation while it's not in this chart, includes the story of units. So as you can see from each one, it's that initial understanding and representation of part to total, and then breaking that up into units of 10, 10s, 10 tens, and so on as they move up into the middle grades, the story of ratios, and then continuing on into algebra with the algebraic functions. And within each of those areas, there's 6 modules that the students will complete as they continue. The next slide is going to show you just the progression that our students make as they begin in their mathematical understanding. So like in the pre-K classroom, our students understanding number bonds and really making that connection from the numerical representation to the manipulative. So here you see part to total. So there's 2 pieces plus 3 pieces equal 5. And what we are hearing from our pre-K teachers is that the depth of knowledge that our little pre-Kers are demonstrating is really impressive for them, because regardless of the order that the students are seeing 2 plus 3 or 3 plus 2, they're understanding the sum of 5. They're actually understanding if they have 5 total and 3 go away, what equals 2. So we're really impressed to see how that knowledge is grown so early on in their learning and how that will support them as they move on. So we can continue, and you'll see additional representations. And this is what I was just talking about, how the students will see where they have the 5 as the whole, and just the 3, the shaded area wouldn't be visible initially. And then the students would be identifying that 3 plus 2 equals 5. And then in the next one, it's if they have 5 7s, where you may have seen, like you grew up learning math, 5 times 7 equals 35. This at the younger ages, helping the students understand if they have 2 7s and 3 7s, that would equal 5 7s. And then it continues on through representations of fractions, decimals, and even integers. So next, you're going to see additional pictorial models that are available. And this is consistent with the use of high leverage models, such as the number bonds, the area models, tape diagrams, number lines, and they move with students within and across the grade level. So they build on that foundational knowledge. If you remember from that first image that we saw, the students were taking the place markers with 4 in the 100s column and then breaking it out in here in the place value chart, understanding that how that continues to grow with them. These models support students to deeply understand the why behind the math, even as the units and the calculations become more complex. The tape diagrams, I've seen those in the 3rd grade classroom where the students are understanding, parts to whole again and solving word problems, trying to understand the missing pieces. So that's been very helpful for the students in trying to do that. So in our next slide, we just really talking about those connections at home. We know math can be a stressful time for students after they've left the classroom. So we really are working to provide those additional supports for our families at home. And we really honor you as your child's first teacher. So it is okay if you have questions. So reach out for any support that you may need anytime that you are trying to support your child with mathematics. It's always helpful, no matter what you're doing, to be and have those mathematical conversations because together we will help your child with that. And so some of the resources that we suggest is really just that growth mindset that you have with your child. So I know that when I was growing up, the message that was given to me by my mom was that I was not a math person, and that has stayed with me throughout my life. So I would say that we really want to encourage our little ones to really focus on their mathematical thinking. And as we're walking outside or doing something in the house, really looking at those different opportunities to find math in our day-to-day life, and understanding that mathematicians do make mistakes and how we learn from those mistakes. That's really part of that whole growth mindset. So it's really wonderful if we can model that both in school and at home. So as I mentioned, we do have supports for our parents, and I will, in this presentation, you'll see later on that there is a link to some mathematical at-home sheets for families, just to explain different strategies students may be using in the classroom. You can see from this example, like part to whole. So that in this example, they have 5 Bs already in the hive, and then 3 coming, and they're really working with students to do that count on. So counting on from 5. And so those are some of the activities that you might see in those family worksheets at home. Another thing that we really encourage for parents is just the math talk that you can do with your child. So as your child is doing some math at home, if they're struggling, really have them talk through what it is that they're doing. You can have them explain what their drawing shows. You could talk to them if they agree with something that you're doing or disagree, and get the reason why. Their thinking tool worksheet is very helpful as well. This allows them to just talk about what they do first, and then what are they doing during, as they're trying to solve their problem, and then as they reflect on it. And so for the family math pages, as I mentioned at the beginning, our teachers are reviewing some of the resources because there are so many that are available to them. We've spent some of our superintendent's conference day, and we've been working during our department time just to provide them time to review some of the materials. So one of these are the family letters that can go home, just explaining the types of things that they're working on in their class. So our teachers will have access to that and be sharing those as they are relevant to your child at home. And next we have just a video representation that our teachers have access to, just to get students thinking about math and not notice and wonder opportunity. And you'll notice from this video that there's no written language and there's no talking, just to take that aspect out of the mathematical piece. So what we're clearly just asking our students to do, and giving our parents in this, that you guys, the opportunity as well. Just watch and see what you notice and wonder through this quick 1-minute video. get started. So just a very simple video, but again, during this time, the teacher would show this in the classroom. It's important to note that there are no wrong answers. It really is an opportunity just to have our students begin talking about what they're noticing, what they're wondering. So you may have seen there were 4 rocks that were a dark color and 3 rocks that were a lighter color. So maybe in your head, you were thinking something 7. And then as she was walking, she saw 3 other rocks. So maybe initially, you might be saying 7 + 3 = 10. You could go deeper into that depending on what the intent of the lesson was. In this lesson, it would just be part total, but it could have also been a sorting opportunity. So the rocks were different colors. So then you could go deeper to have students looking at how many were of this color, how many were the lightest color, the darkest color, and so on. So it's just an opportunity, again, just to have students, even through games, having them use their mathematical skills to deepen their knowledge. So on this last slide here, we have 2 different links available to our families that will be accessible to you as well. The first one has some math tip sheets, so we can go ahead and click on that first one. And from here, it'll open up, and as we scroll down, it's by grade level. The first one has all of them. So if you have children in multiple grades and you were just interested in not having to skip around, we can open any one of them. It doesn't matter which one we click on. So from here, you can see that you can either add it to the dashboard, or if you click directly on the sheet, it should open. Mine was opening, but I already added it maybe to my dashboard. You can click on that. We are not signed in on that one, but what it'll do, I apologize because I didn't get the login, but there you can see a representation. So depending on what level of math it is, it breaks down the concept that's happening in the classroom so that you have some background knowledge on what it is that the teachers are explaining to our students, so that you also have those resources. But I think in the end, what's most important is that if you see that your child is struggling with something, just reach out to your child's teacher, let them know that they were struggling. We never want to see a student spend hours on a math problem. That's not healthy either. It doesn't build their math confidence, but just let the teacher know, like, they were struggling on problem number 10. If you could look at that tomorrow, that would be helpful. Anything like that, our teachers are always, it's more information for them than just to not have a blank, not have any homework in at all. So thank you again for taking the time to listen to our presentation. And now we're going to go over to Intern Superintendent Ms. Hernandez-Padala, and she's going to take it away, sharing with us some information on Orton Gillingham.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. So we're going to talk a little bit about Orton Gillingham, which is it is an approach to teaching literacy. And it focuses on teaching literacy at the phoneme level. So what's really fantastic about this is it is a multi-sensory program in its design. There are many multi-sensory programs that are out there, but Orton Gillingham is the original, and they make the distinction that this is an approach to teaching literacy. So it is the way in which the instruction is delivered to the student that can be tailored to groups or individual students. in order to be able to go as fast as you can, but as slow as you must in order for students to master the skills and build upon them. We're really fortunate that in our district, we have upwards of 30 teachers at this point who have been trained to be classroom educators of the Orton Gillingham approach. And in addition to that, we have at this point close to 10 who are in the process of completing their practicum, but have already completed the training to be an associate level Orton Gillingham practitioner, which will allow them to work with small groups and individual students as an intervention program as well. So we're really excited about Orton Gillingham, but we think it's important for parents to understand what it is, right? So what is the approach that we're talking about? It's a multi-sensory approach. So when we think of sensory, we're talking about multiple different sensory inputs. We're talking about our senses. And we're talking about multi, so more than one at the same time. We're also talking about an approach that is action-oriented. It also involves the simultaneous multiple sensory inputs that are auditory, tactile, and visual as well. And that's all happening at one time. And the point of that is that it really helps to add with the possibilities of storage, retrieval, and memory of skills that students are learning. The skills are reinforced through listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And one thing that you'll hear in the Orton Gillingham approach is the suggested use of simultaneous oral spelling. So what that is that as students will say a letter, they'll say the name, they'll say the sound, and they'll also trace the letter in the air. So if I were teaching the letter A to my students, I would have them all use their arms and say A, apple, A in the air. A, apple, A. So as you can see, at that time, we're saying it, we're hearing it, and we're also using our muscles to spell it. A, apple, A. The more ways in which we can engage students in their sensory inputs during these activities, the more likely they are to be able to solidify that into their memory and then also to retrieve it at a later time. If you look, Orton Gillingham refers to the language triangle with visual, auditory, and kinesthetic inputs. So anytime we can engage those senses for our instructional practices, we can help students to solidify the memory and meaning of the sound symbol relationship. So we want them to see the grapheme or the visual symbol. We call them letters. Sometimes there are two letters depending on what phoneme we're addressing at the time. We want them to hear the sounds. We want them to say the sounds. And we also want them to use motor movements in order to engage as many senses as possible in the process. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we do that in the classroom and how you can do that at home to be able to support your student on this language learning process. So the Orton Gillingham approach is structured, meaning it is very routine in the way in which each lesson is structured throughout the class period. It is repetitive. It is sequential, so skills build upon one another, and it is cumulative. So we're always going back, and I'll show you in a bit what I mean by that. We're always going back to continuously review our old skills, the ones we learned previously, and also connecting them to new skills. So whenever we're doing any of this in terms of building on the sound symbol relationship, learning language rules, creating generalizations, or understanding the patterns of language, anytime we're doing that, we're also going back because first we learn them in isolation and then we start to combine them with one another to make meaning out of combinations of phonemes or letters, sounds, and then making them into words, making words in combination into sentences which have meaning. So that's really the structure of the program, and that's how it's intended to be utilized. First, we learn consonants, vowels, then we learn digraphs, blends. We're going to learn diphthongs. We'll learn syllables, syllable types, how to divide words into syllables. We learn roots. So roots have meanings, right? That's a part of a word, a multisyllabic word typically. that has a meaning. A lot of our words in the English language have Latin or Greek roots. So helping students as they get older and progress in learning language, helping them to know and identify those Latin and Greek roots allows them to make meaning to the words they see on the page. So that helps with vocabulary development. We also learn prefixes and suffixes and their meanings as well, so that when we're looking at these words, we can break them apart into multiple parts that each have meaning, and then therefore we can make meaning from words that may otherwise seem complex. The one thing I will say is that during this process of learning the Orton Gillingham approach, I actually did the 60-hour training to be trained at the associate level. And when I did it, I thought to myself so many times, like, wow, I didn't know this language rule. And how did I ever learn to read without some of this? So it is quite amazing for folks that didn't have this exposure. But the great thing about the Orton Gillingham approach is that it's proven and research-based to work, even with students who struggle with learning and manipulating language. So it is one of those things where it's very intricate and detailed. It's very purposeful and intentional in the way in which they create structured, sequential, and cumulative manners of teaching. So I just threw out a lot of vocabulary terms like digraph. Well, what is a digraph? Some may know and some may not, and if you don't, that's okay. So a digraph is when two letters appear, but they only make one sound. So if you think in the English language of PH in combination, well, they only make the sound. So that together is a digraph. We also have blends. Blends are when there are multiple letters with multiple sounds. So a beginning blend in the word blend is BL. So you hear bl, bl. Those are two different distinct sounds that come together, and that is considered a blend in the English language. And then there's also a diphthong. So in the word coin, you will see two vowels in the middle, the O and the I, where the sound starts as one sound and it ends as another. So coin is oi in the middle, right? So you can actually hear two distinct sounds starting and ending that vowel pair. We also talked about syllable types. So who knew that there was a whole zoo of syllable types? There is a rabbit syllable. So that is when you have two vowels with two consonants in between, and this will help to teach students how to divide their words into syllables. So when you have a rabbit word, you're going to find those two vowels, you're going to isolate the consonants in between, and then you are going to divide it right between those two consonants. And the students, through the Orton Gillingham approach, will be able to identify that rab in the beginning is a closed syllable, and bit at the end is also a closed syllable, meaning that vowel is encased by consonants. We then have two very similar syllable types, tiger and camel. If you notice, they have the same vowel consonant vowel pattern in the middle of the word. But if you think about, well, who would win in a fight between a tiger and a camel? 75% of the time, it's going to be the tiger. So we have students sort of test this one out and think about, well, have you ever heard of a camel? No, but you probably heard of a camel, right? So that is going to be a camel division. But more commonly, you're going to have tiger words. So that's going to be splitting it before the first vowel and consonant for an open syllable at the beginning, and then the ger, tiger, closed syllable at the end. We also have a turtle. This is my very favorite rule. I have no idea why, but when we're talking about syllable types, there's actually a jingle that goes along with this in Gillingham, and it says consonant LE, we count back 3. So if you think of purple, turtle, anything like that, it's a way that students can remember where they break up that word. We also have a lion syllable. So this is when there are two vowels that aren't the typical vowel team. You're going to separate the word between those two vowels. So for an open syllable at the beginning, lion, right? So those are our 5 different types of syllables that students use. So sometimes when we're working with a student and they're having difficulty pronouncing the word or even spelling the word, we'll go back to, well, what type of syllable is that? And is that a rabbit syllable? Is that a rabbit syllable, or is that a tiger syllable? And that will help them to understand whether or not they have to make it closed syllable, and if they have to look at separating the word and spelling it differently. This probably all sounds kind of confusing, but we're going to go through what an Orton Gillingham lesson looks like in just a moment. So what I do want to go back and focus on is why we use multi-sensory instruction in the first place. So one of the things that's most powerful in learning language is the sensors, the language sensors in the brain have a direct link to our fingertips. So anytime we can create a tactile multi-sensory experience for students, that's going to help to embed that meaning right into our brains. So if you look at this slide, it explains that you will remember 10% of what you hear, 20% of what you see, 50% of what you read, and 90% of what you do. So if we can combine all of that, it helps to connect all of our learning pathways through that multisensory approach, which is why when we're planning for work with our students, we want to incorporate as many of these different sensory experiences as we possibly can. So again, why is this so important for us? So in the United States, 66% of fourth graders are found to not be reading at grade level. That's extremely important because in the beginning of students' educational experience, they're learning to read. And once they get to about third, fourth grade, after that, they have to be able to read in order to learn, right? So much of what we learn past third grade is taken in from our reading around the world, like reading books. It could just be reading signs. It could be, any experience that we want to have that is in text. We need to be able to read and make meaning out of the words on the page. So why is it so important to us here in Millbrook? Well, I want the 34% of students reading. I want them to be our Millbrook students and make sure of that. When we compare to other countries like Canada, they have a much lower rate of students who are not reading or who are struggling. And that could be because of the approaches that they use in teaching. Additionally, we have the difficulty of statistic that 80% of students from low socioeconomic backgrounds are reading below grade level. So while we might not be able to change that statistic in terms of who are our students that are living below the socioeconomic or coming from a socioeconomic background, we can change the approach by which they're being taught, right? And we can level their experience while they're here in our building. So how can you help at home? You can help to build awareness at home by playing games, play with words, play with sounds, have your child start to manipulate sounds and make it kind of fun. So you can do something with rhyming. At the word level, you can give them 3 different words. So you can say cat saw bat, or you can give them multiple pictures of objects and say, which one doesn't sound the same? Which one doesn't rhyme? So once they learn about rhyming, and this is something that can be done even with preschoolers or kindergartners, they can start rhyming. They can say, well, saw doesn't rhyme with cat or bat. Then you can do things like blending. You can take 2 words or 2 pictures. You can have a picture of rain. You can have a picture of a bow, and you can ask them blend those words together. Rainbow, right? You can do just the opposite, and you can segment words. So you can have a doormat, and you can tell them this is a picture of a doormat. What 2 words do you hear? Doormat. You can use deletion. So once they start getting, and these are more complex skills, once we start getting at individual sounds in the word, so you can take the word sled and ask them to repeat back to me the word sled without the S sound, and they should be able to say lead. So this is just some fun practice. Don't be discouraged if they can't do it, but as they learn those skills throughout the Orton Gillingham approach in their classroom, they'll be able to do more of that. So you can do words with isolation. You can say, so the word cat, what's the first sound you hear in the word cat? And hopefully they're able to tell you k. And then you can ask them, okay, what letters make the sound k? And as they learn, they will be able to understand that both K and C make the sound k. And as they learn to spell and they learn additional rules, they'll be able to know that in the word cat, because there is an Orton Gillingham taught rule that K takes I and E and C takes the other three, they'll be able to eventually say, oh, mom, that's a cat, C-A-T, right? And then also in the game of substitution, you can give them a word like mat and tell them, tell me the word mat, but with the beginning sound of C or K, and they should be able to tell you back cat. So how do you make this multi-sensory? Well, honestly, I told you even in the beginning that you could simply just have them air spell. Something that's great about air spelling is that oftentimes our students will start by pushing, and pushing is a great skill to have, but it's easier than pulling. So students will tend towards it. We actually need them to be pulling. So if you can have your child at home working on either a slant board or an easel and starting at the top and going to the bottom, that's actually better for their tactile input. So anytime you have an easel or a slant board and you can have your student using large muscle movement, that's ideal. What you can also do as they start writing on paper is you can put sandpaper. You can have them use their finger and trace letters on sandpaper. You can put an old piece of like a window screen underneath their piece of paper. And honestly, just the bumpiness of a screen provides more tactile input for your child. And therefore, it's actually stimulating those neural pathways more. You can use a piece of canvas. You can have them finger paint on canvas. You can have them write something with a dry erase marker and then use their finger to erase that same thing. And all the while, remember, we want that simultaneous oral spelling with multisensory inputs. So if we'll stick with the letter A, it's A, apple, A, apple, every single time. You can use Play-Doh and have them manipulate Play-Doh into the letter shape. You can have them use a sand tray. You can even, if you're ready to get messy, you can give them a tray of shaving cream and have them trace the letters into shaving cream. Anytime they're using their muscle movement, especially if it's something gritty, I prefer sand trays because they're gritty, so they're also giving input on the fingertip itself. And you're going to want to use that simultaneous oral spelling, have them say it aloud while they're spelling it. And you can even, if they're getting into letters, you can even have them start to tap out the letters that they hear, right? So in cat, we hear k, ats, k, ats. So for a student who is left-handed, they're going to use their right hand, and a student who is right-handed, they're going to use their left hand, pen in one hand, they're going to use their tapping on the other hand so that they're able to hear each individual sound and then decide what symbol or letter goes along with that sound. And then you're going to make sure that they have visuals in front of them. So you want to have them see the grapheme and visualize or verbalize rather the phoneme. One of the things that we hear quite often is phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, phonics, all of these words. And sometimes they're used interchangeably, but they're not exactly the same thing. So phonological awareness is oral language, and it is the foundation for written language. Phonemic awareness is auditory inputs, and it does not necessarily involve print. So when we're practicing phonemic awareness, we're practicing that blending, that segmentation, the isolations of sound, deletions of sounds, substitutions of sounds, those bits that I had explained before on how to practice phonemic awareness at home. And phonics is when we start to create that sound symbol relationship. So we've learned to manipulate these sounds, we've learned to identify these sounds, and then we're going to make the phonics association. Well, we have these sounds. Now what symbols do I write on the page in order to make these sounds? Again, just a review of phonemic awareness. This is a great little chart that gives you little examples of what you can do. So what is the first sound in cat? And that would be the k. What is the last sound in cat? T. What is the middle sound in cat? And that's the a, apple, a. So this is just some more examples on building phonemic awareness. I did want to just explain, as I had reminded, the architecture of an Orton Gillingham lesson is very routine and very repetitive. So every single lesson follows pretty much the same pattern. So it'll start off by an auditory phonemic awareness piece. So as I just mentioned, we might be substituting. So you have the word map. You know, tell me map with the C at the beginning, right? So they might say cat. And then you're going to practice salmon and white cards. So when I explained that everything is cumulative, if I have a group of students or an individual, I'm going to add salmon and white cards as they learn each of the phonemes, or it could be a phoneme or it could be a blend. I'm going to add that to their deck, and then I would sit with my student and I would literally go through and they would tell me a apple, I itchy, I have Alex Shanowski here, our supervisor of PPS, as my student and test subject. So in the classroom, this is how it would go. Okay, so what word might you hear in?
Kite.
K,
Kite.
Very good. And if she struggled with that, I might put it at the back of the pack just to remind myself that we need to revisit it.
Man.
Okay, so you get the idea. So then we would go through alphabet and letter formation. So now we're going to get into writing. So we used our auditory, we've engaged visual, and now we're going to get into our writing. So every single time we're doing an Orton Gillingham lesson, as the students have learned these letters, once they learn the full alphabet, we're going to have them actually write their alphabet on the paper in their phonics notebook. There's a reason for that. So many of our students can sing A, B, C, D, but they don't actually have the association of the letter with the symbol. So we're going to have them do that. And then we're going to get into yellow cards. So yellow cards, I don't have them here with me, but they're utilized for spelling. So they're utilized to bring the grapheme into the association. And then once we do a review of the deck of sentences, whatever that is, wherever we are in our progression. So you're hearing sentences and maybe thinking, how is my kindergartner reading sentences? Well, they might not be, but as they get older, we add elements to this process. And this is Orton Gillingham in totality. So we are going to review the deck and sentences. We're going to review spelling. So first, I may have them read something, and then I may do an oral dictation where they're actually going to be writing and using their rules that they know about language in order to properly spell words and or sentences. So there's also introducing a new rule. So we would then, once they've done all of their practice, we'll say, today we're going to learn about I consonant E rule. So we're going to say I consonant E spells I. And then the students would repeat back to me, I consonant E spells I. Then we're going to do something called trace, copy, cover, which on the next slide, you're going to see this actual page that they would have available to them, where the rule is written at the top and it says, I consonant E says I consonant E says I. So students are utilizing this paper and they're actually doing exactly what the trace, copy, cover suggests. So first they are tracing the I, and you'll notice it is a cursive I, and I'll talk about why in just a moment. So I consonant E spells I consonant E spells I consonant E spells I. And then they're going to do the same thing, but now they're going to copy it from above. So we know that some students who struggle with language and learning language struggle with that skill, right? So they're going to copy from above and they no longer have the crutch of tracing. So now they're going to independently write exactly what's above. I consonant E spells I consonant E says I consonant E says I. Then we're going to take even that crutch away and we're going to cover the top part. And they have to independently from memory say to themselves, I consonant E spells I consonant E says I consonant E says I. And then the next skill, which is the highest skill in building automaticity is to do the same thing while averting their eyes. So they're going to look away and say, I, consonant E says I. I, consonant E says I. So that's how we're going to do this progression. And as they learn and solidify each of these skills, it goes into their phonics notebook and it becomes something that we will cumulatively test and rehearse. Then we will be looking at our new spelling, the spelling of new rules in practice, and then we will practice those words in a decodable oral reading text. So I have my trusty assistant here, Alex. So we're going to go through an Orton Gillingham practice session on what it might look like for a student in the Orton Gillingham classroom. So you'll see that we're going to introduce I, consonant E says I. And then I'm going to have. Elliot. So I'm going to have Alex read this word on the page.
I, consonant E says I, dime.
Dime. Good. And what if the E wasn't there? What would this say, Alex?
Dim.
Dim. Okay, very good. So then we would have the practice of trace, copy, cover, avert that the student had done. So we're introducing this rule. The student is seeing it. They're playing with that rule a little bit. I had to remind Alex, I, consonant E says I. So what if there was no E there? And then she had to go back to what she already knows about those letters and identify that I usually says I, like itchy. But I, consonant E, it says I in the word dime. Next. So in this case, what I might do in the classroom is I might give this word and I might say, what does this word say?
Rip.
Rip. And if I were to add an E, yeah, it's supposed to go away. If I were to add an E here, what would that say?
Right.
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 And how do you know that? What's the rule?
I, consonant E says I.
I, consonant E says I. Very good. And then we might go through additional practice with kit, kite. I might give them fin, fine. We're not going to give them any trick words. We're only going to, at this point, want to give them words where they can practice and be successful using the rule. And again, if they trip up, I'm going to remind them. I, consonant E says I. Very good. Okay. So Alex, if you were going to try and spell that word, that's a tire, how might you do that?
Tire. I, consonant E says I. T-I-R-E.
Tire. Very good. So then I might show them, and what if there was no E at the end of tire? What would that word say?
Tur.
Okay. So sometimes we incorporate nonsense words just so that we can make sure that that students are identifying that phoneme level sound and the combination of sounds in a word. So I might then say, Alex, based on what we learned today, can you try and read this sentence for me?
What? Tim, no, I, consonant E says I. What time is it?
Very good. And we know that that's asking a question, how?
There's a question mark at the end.
There's a question mark. Very good. Then for the next thing I might do is I might have this sentence and I might say to Alex, I'm going to give you a sentence, and based on what we've learned so far, I want you to write the sentence, do the best job you can. So I'm going to dictate to Alex, 4 + 5 is 9. So Alex, because she's done Orton Gillingham with me, and this is very routine, the first thing she's going to do is repeat the sentence back to me. 4 + 5 is 9.
4 + 5 is 9.
Yep. Next, she's going to take her paper and she's actually going to make lines on her paper. 4 + 5 is 9. So she knows exactly how many words she has to spell. And then she's going to take her time in sounding out each of those words. Now, we don't correct in Orton Gillingham, but what we do is we prompt. So say she spelled 9, N-I-N. I would say, oh, Alex, so this says nin. We just learned a rule, I consonant E spells I, says I. What do we have to do here in order to make that say 9?
9. Put an E at the end.
Put an
I
E at the
consonant E says I.
Very good. Okay. So that might be the way in which we might prompt in that case. And then again, you'll see here that the words get a little more complex. So at the beginning of white, we have that WH. So that might be a more complex word that we would teach once we've learned rules associated with that as well. So we just build in a progression and we have students learn to spell that way. I did want to go back because I made mention earlier that one of the things that we do in Orton Gillingham is that we will structure our lessons to include print. And then as students get older, we really want to include cursive. And there's a good reason for that. One of the things that Orton Gillingham is proven to work with successfully is students who struggle with dyslexia. And oftentimes students who struggle with dyslexia or even dysgraphia may have difficulty differentiating between certain letters. And one of the things that's really helpful about cursive is if you think about the way in which we form our letters in print, B and D and P are literally just flipped versions of the same exact letter. But if you think about them in cursive, there's actually different starting points and different muscle flow to forming those letters. So it's extremely helpful for students who struggle with that sound symbol relationship and with identifying the symbols in isolation. It's really helpful for them to use cursive. So you will see that cursive is something that had kind of fallen off for a while. There wasn't a lot of focus on it, but part of Orton Gillingham will be to bring back using cursive writing as well. And it's not just because it's pretty or fancy or fun for students to learn. There's actually a lot of brain research that supports that. So at this time, I do just want to open up if there are any questions in the audience. I'd be happy to answer them at this time. No questions thus far in the chat. So I did just want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank Alex and Amy for presenting with me, and also Elliot for he's here with our technology and helping with the presentation. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us tomorrow or any day in the future, and we'd be happy to answer them. Have a great night. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.